All right, well, Assemblyman Roberts, let's first just talk about some of the news of the day, if we can. Obviously, what took place on Wednesday up out in D.C. on Capitol Hill. I saw your tweet about it. I think it was this morning. Just give me some thoughts from your end of what we saw in the nation's capital yesterday.
Well, actually, I said something out last night, and we're a democracy and a country that the world should look up to, and this is not indicative of what we saw yesterday. Is not indicative of what we should tolerate in our nation, and it's completely uncalled for.
And I appreciate that we're talking federal government, and you're in Carson City, not in Washington D.C. But is there some responsibility? And I know you obviously have history in law enforcement. Is there some responsibility or some accountability that needs to be addressed on your end? And where do you think that responsibility should go?
Well, considering what occurred there, I think there's a number of things that you need to look at. From a law enforcement standpoint, is you need to be concerned about your government buildings being overrun. That's a challenge. I don't know if the Capitol Police were restrained by things that occurred this past summer, that they didn't have less than lethal options, or they were underprepared. I don't know. I'm sure, or at least I'm hopeful that somebody will flush that out. I know that security concerns are an issue here as we get ready to go to the legislative session. I know a few of my peers have expressed, as well as some leadership have expressed concerns about security at the legislature. You put COVID on top of that, and building restrictions. It'd be interesting to see, what we come up with to allow the public to have access to the building.
How about political responsibility?
Well, look, we all have a responsibility to do the right thing, to send the right messages to the public, and give reassurances that government is going to hold people accountable, and we're to include ourselves.
Let's switch gears and talk about the legislative session on the horizon. Everyone that I've talked to, and I'm sure everyone you have talked to and firsthand, it's going to be bad. There's a lot of cuts on the horizon. There's not a lot of money to go around. What are the big budget holes, and how are you going to work with Democrats to try and achieve your needs and achieve the needs of your constituents while also still, staying within the confines of the budget?
Well, during the special session, we cut the budgets pretty far back. I think you're going to see a continuation of a lot of those cuts due to the revenue shortfall from the governor's closures. Obviously the budget it's got really three big holes. Three big items that we fund. It's education, healthcare, and public safety issues, and actually delivering government services to the state. And so, those are your biggest ones. And, we're going to have to ensure that we continue to provide services to the citizens of Nevada. But I think we also need to be cognizant that the federal government did put a lot of money into our state under the first relief act under COVID. Almost $19 billion have came to our state, and our biannual budget is eight point something billion, so there's a lot of money that's been infused into government. We need to completely flush that out on where those general fund dollars are being stashed. I know there was some at the end of the year, the calendar year, we moved some money into the general fund, and to carry over. So, that money will be used to shore it up. And some of the revenue projections actually came in a little better than where they were previously predicted, but really fall short of where we should be.
Let me ask you this: when you're talking about the federal money coming into Nevada, you were using words, where the money's been stashed, are you concerned about where the money that has already come to Nevada has already gone, or where it has not gone?
Well, I'm on a subcommittee to look at where some of the money has been spent. There's been some visibility on it. I can tell you that me and my peers, even on both sides of the aisle, to some degree, was a little frustrated with knowing exactly where all the funds went early. We're catching up now. During the last fiscal or the last interim finance committee, there was quite a bit of money that was used to supplant some government salaries. So that freed up some other funds that actually, we already funded for government salaries. So there's 160 million there that is in the general fund, which, okay, well, what are we going to do with that? Can we, in my opinion, I believe it should be used or utilized to provide further relief to the citizens of Nevada, not necessarily to shore up, government salaries. We expressed some of that in that hearing. But what's done is done. It's better than sending it back to Washington. We were up on a deadline. So we'll flush all that out. We'll be at the table, and we'll figure out the best course. I don't believe 12% reductions across the board are the answer. So it'd be interesting to see what the governor's proposal will be, coming up, and then we'll work from there.
Obviously, you were former assistant sheriff, and we've talked with current Sheriff Lombardo about issues of police reform in light of the Black Lives Matter protests. In my conversations with him, he has essentially said, at that time anyway, he had not had a lot of conversations with state lawmakers, with Clark County Commission. There hasn't been too much of an in-depth discussion of what's going to happen up in Carson City at the legislative session. So how much of that discussed reform do you think will actually get discussed at the legislative session?
Well, I think we did some things during a special session that law enforcement approved for the most part in the state. I know there's going to be some bills that are going to want to push reform further. I think folks like Sheriff Lombardo and police leaders in our state are willing to be at the table and talk about reform issues. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of things that we do in Nevada are considered best practices in the nation. We can always make improvements, and I think we're always willing to be at the table to talk about it. And I haven't seen a profession. Well, I've been in it. I was in it for 30 some odd years, and it has completely changed through my whole course of my career, and it continues to change. And I think law enforcement knows that we need to be responsive to the citizens, and if they have an issue or they have concerns, then we need to sit down and talk about it and make changes if they need to be done.
Another major issue, and probably the biggest one, involves education funding. That's kind of a perennial, or I should say perennial, but every legislative session it's an issue. What kind of bills do you see coming down the pipe with regards to not only funding, but any sort of changes to education operations? Let's talk K-12 education. What's going to come down the pipe?
I mean, last session there was some funding formulas that that were approved by the legislature to shift funding. I think we really need to let that work its way out. We still aren't completely back in the classroom, and so I would be interested to see how that has impacted the budget. It would logically, you would think that there would be some budget relief from not actually being in the classroom. But I know we had to spend some money to get us up and running for remote learning. But a lot of that burden was put on federal relief dollars. So what we need to see what the school year looks like going forward. I don't think that throwing more money at an issue is necessarily the right answer. But education is a priority for us. It's a big chunk of our budget, and I think we need to really look at it closely when we're when we're looking at cuts, and make some of those, some of the latter ones.
Another issue that's been going on since the beginning of the pandemic, I remember listening to a couple of interim finance committee meetings about DETR, and
Yeah.
especially at the beginning, and it's still a lingering issue. We get calls about it all the time here. How would you grade DETR's response to the pandemic and the unemployment, and what kind of conversations might there be up at the legislative session to try and help these people out?
Well, look, I don't think anyone anticipated the landslide of applications that we had coming into DETR. So I will give them that, right? I believe that it's unprecedented. Nobody could be prepared for it. I think there was a significant amount of lag time in ramping up and in addressing a lot of issues. I think accessibility has been a challenge. I mean, that's been a majority of my constituent complaints, and what I've worked on is people can't get into the system. They can't call anybody. The computer system would lock them out. There's a number of those things. It took us a while. It took DETR a while to set up a task force to work through those. I think I'm not getting nearly the amount of complaints that I did early on. So I think we've resolved some of those. We made some changes during the special session to allow the director some leeway to make adjustments. I think those have been some benefits, but I think there's still a number of people out there that are frustrated with the system, and we really need to take a good look at how we can make some improvements to it. But because it did not, serve Nevadans well, especially when, we had as high unemployment and still continue to have one of the highest unemployments, numbers in the nation. So we need to really take a look at that again and continue to make improvements there.
I know people call us and say they can't get answers. You kind of address that. We've called to try and get answers from time to time from DETR.
Right.
I think we don't get them very much. How would you characterize the transparency or lack thereof from DETR?
Well, there wasn't a lot of transparency in the first, I don't know, 6 to 8 months. I guess during the pandemic, there was a change in directors. They were very overwhelmed with the workflow. Our constituent services had an opportunity to have, some direct contact with DETR. The new director, Ms. Caffaretta, has actually reached out to legislators, and so I've had conversations with her, and so I have the ability to reach out for specific issues, and so there's been a lot of improvement from where it was, but it took us a long time to get there, and I think that frustrated legislators and citizens alike, and we need to learn from it and make some adjustments moving forward.
Final question. I know this has gone longer than probably you expected.
Yeah, no worries.
The mechanics of the legislative session. Obviously, during the interim period, it's been mostly virtual. All of it's been virtual, essentially. Do you envision that continuing?
I certainly hope not. I believe, I've participated in some phone calls with some national organizations and heard from speakers and folks in other legislatures around the country, and other bodies have found a way to have limited public access and a reduced public access. We're not gonna. I just don't, under the current conditions. There's probably no way to be 100% open, but certainly we can figure out a way to have limited capacity, allow people to testify in hearings, to be able to ask questions. We can't do what we did during the special session, and have public comment for 2 minutes. And like what we do in a lot of our interim committees is public comment is just not the way to develop policy. And when we're going to be faced with difficult decisions like you talked about, or like we talked about already, education, healthcare, DEETR, things like that. If we don't have the ability to ask experts questions or citizens to be able to weigh in and actually give us their experiences, I don't know how we can effectively solve problems and develop policy to address the issues that impact the state. So we need to be open in some shape or form.
Thank you very much for letting us bother you today. Appreciate it. We had
Appreciate
all these, when you have all these pent-up legislative questions, they all sort of come out at once. So I appreciate the
Yeah, no worries. And I appreciate your time. And anytime you guys need anything, let me know.